So good afternoon, all distinguished attendees of this webinar. We started this webinar series in sometime in August, and this is being organized by IME Mumbai chapter. And we had till today about six webinars, and this is the seventh in the series. And today's webinar is on topic of implications of National Education Policy 2020 for engineering education in India. This is as all of us know, this is a highly debated and discussed policy today in terms of how do we effectively implement it, and there are a number of challenges associated with its implementation. And we have very distinguished speaker today in the form of Professor R.K. Shivgaonkar, who is a renowned researcher, educationist, as well as an able administrator who has served in many positions in many institutes in India. So we have him today as a speaker. And now, without wasting any further time, I will now request Professor A.K. Suresh, co-convener of IIM Mumbai chapter, to formally introduce the speaker and request him to give the talk.
Thank you, Professor Kulkarni, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this seventh webinar of the Mumbai chapter. And it's also my pleasant duty to introduce the speaker of the day, Professor Shivgaonkar. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Professor Shivgaonkar was at IIT Bombay for many years on the Faculty of Electrical Engineering. And then in that institute, he not only was a faculty member, but was also shouldered various responsibilities, culminating in the Deputy Directorship of Finance and External Affairs. And then he wanted to see the world, so he moved to University of Pune and then took up directorship at IIT Delhi. And he has just completed a vice chancellorship at Bennett University, and he is now back in Mumbai. Dr. Shivgaonkar has been an active researcher in the area of electromagnetics, optical communication, image processing, antennas, microwaves, radio astronomy, etc. He has extensively published in international journals and conferences. He has authored a textbook called Electromagnetic Waves and a monograph on transmission lines for electrical engineers with McGraw-Hill Education. He has occupied many academic leadership positions. Some of them I mentioned a while ago. He was director of IIT Delhi, vice chancellor at University of Pune, vice chancellor of Bennett University, and deputy director at IIT Bombay, dean resource mobilization at IIT Bombay, etc., etc. He was also the head of the Department of Electrical Engineering and was the founder head of the Center for Distance Engineering Education program at IIT Bombay. He is a fellow of IEEE, INAE, NASI, Institution of Electronics and Telecommunications Engineers, Optical Society of India, Institution of Engineers, Maharashtra Academy of Sciences, and a member of International Astronomical Union and Astronomical Society of India. He is a recipient of IEEE Williams Sale Award for his achievements in engineering education, IEEE Undergraduate Teaching Award for his inspirational teaching, SN Mitra Memorial Award of the INAE for his contribution to electromagnetics, antenna and radio astronomy, Ramlal Wadhwa Award of IETE for his outstanding contribution to optical communications, Vasvik Award in ICT, and the Excellence in Teaching Award of IIT Bombay. He has received the Education Leadership Award from Headlines Today and Devang Mehta Educational Excellence Award. It is indeed our pleasure to host this webinar and welcome Professor Shivgaonkar to deliver his talk on NEP 2020. Before I ask him to proceed, there are a couple of housekeeping announcements. All the attendees are muted and they will remain muted during the entire talk. If you have any questions, please, you will see an ellipsis at the end of the bottom row. of icons, and there is a Q&A box there. Please type your questions there. And once Professor Shevgaonkar is done with his talk, I will pose your questions to him. And if there is any clarification that he needs from you, we will unmute you and you can pose the question directly. With that, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Shevgaonkar to deliver his talk.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Suresh. A webinar which is organized by INAE. I have been associated with INAE for a very long time, and it is indeed an honor to make this presentation to a very august audience of the fellows of INAE and other distinguished invitees for this webinar. Now, as we all know that the NEP 2020 was launched about 8 to 10 months back, none less than the Honorable Prime Minister of India. And after that, there have been various webinars. Actually, there would have been seminars, but because of this COVID-19, there are many webinars. Actually, there was a time after the policy was launched. Every alternate day, there used to be a webinar based on NEP 2020. And various issues, related to law, related to implementation, all education formats, many things were actually discussed in those webinars. So my presentation here will be actually amalgamation of many of these things, which actually came through many of the webinars which were conducted, even by the government bodies and the professional bodies like MHRD, the CII, the NASSCOM. All these bodies also gave feedback and conducted the webinars related to NEP 2020. So my talk actually is going to be primarily in 3 parts. The first part will be highlighting what is this NEP 2020 policy, because everybody may not be fully conversant with what NEP 2020 is proposing. Secondly, I will be talking about the education, future education, and particularly the engineering future education, what actually we are looking for in the years to come. And then finally, I will talk about what are the challenges in implementing this NEP 2020 in India. So some of the slides which I have taken about NEP 2020, something have been taken verbatim from the presentation which was made by MHRD. Something has been taken by verbatim from the policy itself, which is about 60-page summary document which was published by MHRD about NEP 2020. So initial portion, you will see that it gives you a perspective about what NEP 2020 is proposing. And then we'll talk about the engineering education and the implication of NEP 2020 for education and its implementation. Next slide, please. So before we get into this, let us see how the evolution of education took place in country after independence in 1947. So very quick look, the University Education Commission was established in 1948-49. Then there was a Secondary Education Commission, which was in 1952-53. Then there was Education Commission in 1964-66 under Dr. D.S. Kothari. And you might recall that most of the time we talk about the Kothari Commission when we talk about the higher education in India. So that's the commission which was about in 60s. And then the national policy on education was there in 1968. Then there was a 42nd constitutional amendment in 1976, which brought education in concurrent list of the items of the constitution. And then the policy, national education policy, was launched in 1986. That was the last education policy actually which was launched in India before this one, which came in 2020. So the policy was modified in 1992, and then there were some committees which were there in 2016 and 19. But by and large, if you really look at the policy at a national level, the last policy India got was in 1986. So that means about after 34 years, we got this new policy, what is called the National Education Policy, NEP 2020. Next, please. So this policy, when it was in process, it was a fairly consultative process. Actually, this was under the chairmanship of Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and a lot of inputs were actually sought from various bodies and individuals from the country. Actually, there was an online website, mygov.in, and they seeked input from various stakeholders in education. There was a free site; anybody could write their comments and opinions and suggestions about this. And then they got feedback, input from about 2.5 lakh gram panchayats and about 676 districts. Right, that was in 2015. The inputs were received from these various bodies. And then the draft NEP was floated in 2019 in summary and in 22 languages, and also in the form of audio book. And that time, this policy was in the draft form, and people were asked to opine on the policy, which is the draft policy, and any material which could be added, deleted, modified. The inputs were sought again from large number of people. And that's the time actually I got into giving feedback on the NEP 2020 through CII and NASSCOM, because there were many meetings which were held in 18 in Delhi, where people were discussing about what feedback can be given for improving the draft of this national education policy. There was education dialogue with the MPs from various states of Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry, Karnataka, Odisha, and those inputs were taken into framing the policy. There was a special meeting which was held of CABE in 2019, and then there was a parliamentary standing committee of HRD in 2019, which gave the final shape to the NEP 2020. So if you look at the NEP 2020, the first thing which they have done, so if you look at this policy, you will see the policy is actually in two parts. The substantial part of the policy essentially deals with the school education. And then the second part, which deals with the higher education. So there is a complete reform which has been proposed by the national education policy in the school domain. For example, the 15 years which they are talking about, starting from the kindergarten, that structure has been a modified structure than what actually exists at this point of time in India. Then the second part, which is the higher education policy, and that's what I'm going to talk more about, that talks in general about higher education, not a particular discipline or a particular profession, but a general philosophy, what the higher education should be and which direction the education should move. That's what actually is talked in the second part of this NEP 2020. So I'm essentially going to focus more on that. So what first thing which the policy does is it talks about what is missing at this point of time in Indian education system. So next, please. So the next slide gives you the problems which are faced by the current higher education system in India. And these points I have really taken verbatim from the NEP 2020. First thing which the policy says is that the current education system in India is severely fragmented. Right? Secondly, it says that the less emphasis on development of the cognitive skills and the learning outcomes. That means the system is more exam oriented, maybe rote learning and maybe reproduction in the examination, but it does not really cater to the cognitive skills or development, and also the learning outcomes are not really taken into consideration properly. Third thing which mentions is that the rigid separation of disciplines, early specialization in narrow areas of studies. And that you can see especially in engineering. Slowly, people have started taking specialization right from their first year. So they do not really create a broad base. Normally, everybody wants to get into a program which they think will become them more employable, and they start studying only those subjects right from the beginning. So this rigid separation of disciplines and narrow specialization, this is one of the problems of the current education system. Next, it mentions the limited access to the socio-economic disadvantaged areas. Now, if you look at even the engineering institutions, you will see most of them are actually clustered around the larger cities. So if you go to the small towns or the other district level areas, those students don't have really access to good educational institutions. So they have to come to the big cities if they want to get access to that. The few HIEs that teach in local languages. Now, it has been found that many times many children do not come to higher education because they have application of English or other national language. They probably are more conversant in their local language. And if they don't find very comfortable in the local language education, they essentially withdraw from the education. So that's what policy essentially points out. Limited teacher and the institutional autonomy. I think this, all higher educational institution people know that there is a big issue of autonomy which is given to either academic or thing, and I will talk about it a little later. Limited mechanism for merit-based career progression of faculty and leaders. And lesser emphasis on research and lack of competitive research funding. That at the moment, again, the funding has been there, but it has been clustered to only very handful of institutions in India. So if you go to the lower base of the educational system, practically they don't get any research funding from the funding sources. Then there is a suboptimal governance and the leadership in HEIs and ineffective regulatory system. And then there is a large affiliating universities resulting into low standards of UG education. As we know that this affiliation system actually came from the British thing. The universities and the colleges were all affiliated to the universities. But then this affiliation created problems because every time they have to depend upon universities, the autonomy to colleges is not there, the standards are not properly maintained. And that because of that, the UG education, which is primarily into the colleges, that is having not the proper standard as is expected. And of course, at the end, the policy says that it has a very low, the gross enrollment ratio. I think this gross enrollment ratio about 10 years back, people used to talk about 19-20%. Today, if you go by the MHRD number, this gross enrollment ratio is about 26%. This is still smaller than even the Asian countries. And if you really see the global gross enrollment standard, this number has to be significantly higher than what is there at the moment. Next, please. So the policy, in view of this, which are the limitations which are there in the current education system, the policy has proposed certain reforms which have to be executed in about next 10 to 15 years time. So first thing with the policy says, so I have divided these reforms into different categories. One is the academic structure. So the policy says that the gross enrollment ratio by 2035 should be increased from 26% to 50%. Okay, so that is one recommendation. Second recommendation which the policy is making is that the education has to be holistic and multidisciplinary. It should be completely flexible because it should be more student-centric and that kind of thing. So under this, the policy suggests that the program need not be a rigid program of 3 years or 4 years. It could be a flexible program. It could degree program also could be 3-year program, could be 4-year program. Similarly, the postgraduate program could be a 1-year program or a 2-year program. You could have integrated program, which could be combination of bachelor's and the master's program. But more importantly, this policy proposes is what is called a multiple entry and multiple exit options in a normal degree program. That means somebody can exit after 3 years. Somebody can just decide to exit after 1 year and join the program a little later. Somebody may do 1 more year, again go out, again come back. This kind of flexibility this policy is proposing, considering the social requirement in the country. Apparently, at this point of time, there are a large number of students who come out of the schools. Many of them have to earn their bread. They don't have any financial support. And they cannot really afford to go full-time for a degree program at that point of time. So this flexibility essentially from the socio-economic point of view, that those people who cannot really afford education at one stage, this will give you multiple exit, multiple entry options, and people in long run should be able to continue their graduation. This policy has proposed about the MPhil to be discontinued. So as you know that in many universities, the MPhil program is required for going for PhDs. So that program is going to be discontinued. And I think that is good suggestion which is made by the policy NEP 2020. Second thing which the policy has proposed is integration of vocational and professional education. In fact, this recommendation of integration of vocational courses in normal degree program has been coming on and off. So I remember when I was in Pune University, that time even the Maharashtra government has set up a committee to look at the higher education system in Maharashtra. And one of the strong recommendations, and that was chaired by Dr. Kakodkar. And that committee also had made a very strong recommendation about integrating the vocational program into the normal degree program, so that when the people graduate from a university, they become employable, they can find the jobs into the industry. So that was the suggestion which now this policy is also making. The next radical suggestion which policy is making is the credit transfer and the bank of credits. That means now somebody wants to do a degree program, he doesn't have to do the entire credit in one institution. You can do certain credits from one institution, certain credit from other institution, and then sort of all the credit put together. When they meet the requirement of a degree, you will be able to get a degree. Similarly, you can create a credit bank, and apparently there are certain Asian countries where this credit, the academic bank of credit concept exists. So it may not be very popular, but from the flexibility point of view, I think this is something which is again from societal angle, this has been proposed by the NEP 2020. Next thing with the NEP 2020 has proposed is teaching in vernacular languages. It is proposed even the degree programs have to be taught in vernacular languages. Next, please. On the institutional structural reforms, the NEP 2020 now has proposed that there would be 3 types of institutions in the country. Firstly, there will be research-intensive universities, which will be a combination of research and teaching, but they will be more dominated by research, though they will be doing some teaching also. What that means is there are many universities which you see, central universities and all, there is a postgraduate program which are very, very strong. They may have some undergraduate programs, they may have teaching also, but these universities primarily will be focusing on the research. Second type of institutions or universities the NEP proposes is the teaching intensive. So these universities also will do teaching and research, but they will be focusing more on teaching, which could be either undergraduate or postgraduate, and will do some research, but will not be almost at the same level as the research institutions do. So that is the second type of institution which the NEP is proposing. And thirdly, they are proposing what are called the degree granting colleges. These are primarily like undergraduate institutions, but they will be completely autonomous and they can grant degrees. So whatever colleges which you see at this point of time, which are affiliated to the university, many of these colleges might fall into this category if they are performing well, and they can become completely autonomous and they can grant their own degrees to the institution. So these are 3 types of institutions which the NEP is proposing. And one more thing which they have proposed is that a model multidisciplinary education and research university, and which they think can be created practically at every district, so that the people in that region can have access to this multidisciplinary university, right, which can do research also, which can do teaching also, and so on. That is another infrastructural proposal which the NEP 2020 has made. Next, please. On the governance side, again, the NEP 2020 has made many recommendations. First of all, it has recommended that the autonomy will be in a graded fashion. That means those institutions who are performing well on whatever the parameters which we have decided by NAAC or any other body, then slowly those institutions can be granted autonomy. Autonomy could be academic, it could be administrative, it could be financial, it could be all, it could be part of it. But depending on the performance of the institution, the graded autonomy can be granted to the variety of institutions. And they envisage that this affiliation system, which has been prevalent in India for the colleges, that slowly will be phased out in about 15 years of time. So by 2035, most of the colleges, either they will be degree granting institutions or they will grow into a university or an institution which will be either a teaching university or they will be a research university. They also emphasize that these bodies, that these institutions should have completely independent board of governors, so they can decide their own policies, they can decide their own structure, they can decide their own finances, and all the autonomy will be given to these institutions. Single regulator for higher education. So at the moment, you see there are multiple regulators. We have UGC, we have AICTE, we have state level bodies which control the education at various levels. It has been proposed by NEP that it should become a single window kind of a system. Within the single regulator, you can have verticals, but as such, there will be only one regulating body in India which will control the higher education system. However, while doing this, they have excluded the legal education and medical education out of it. And I wonder why the engineering education is still kept under this broad umbrella. As the legal education also has a special requirement, as medical has a special requirement, the engineering also has a special requirement. But nevertheless, the NEP has put the engineering education into the bigger basket, and it will fall into the single regulator category, which will control the entire education in India. Then they are saying all the assessment of the institutions, the approval which process at the moment which is there, which is based on the physical visits of the people and getting the information and all that, they want to make it more on an online self-disclosure based transparent system, right, which will be completely data driven. So if the institutions will provide the data, and then on base of the data which is supplied, the approvals or whatever things required from the regulatory bodies, they can be granted to these institutions, and all this human intervention may be minimized to some extent. Then they are proposing the common norms for the public and private higher education institutions. So they are saying that the private philanthropic partnership, at the moment, if you really look at the private institution, many of the privileges which the government institutions get, the private institutions do not get. So, for example, if you want to get a research funding, you have to meet certain requirements, and by and large, you will see large number of institutions actually cannot really get those research funding, which the government institutions can get reasonably easily. So they have defined the norms, and they are saying even the fee collection, the research funding which they are going to get, the private institutions and government institutions will be treated on par. And if they meet the criteria, there will not be any distinction between the private institutions and the government institutions. That is the proposal which is there, right, to encourage more private equity in the education sector. Next, please. So if you look at the earlier whatever education policy which we had, what are the new things which the policy has been proposing, or what are the changes which they are suggesting? So the first thing which strikes most is that the National Research Foundation, this is the body, you can call it similar to National Science Foundation there in US, or our Department of Science and Technology, which is giving funding. But this is the body which will give funding for all types of research in education, right? And irrespective of which type of institutions are there and which fields of research which are there. So this is one thing which gives you thrust for research in the educational institution. Second thing which they have, which is different, is they have put thrust on the internationalization of education. What that means is that they want to encourage more international institutions to come and set up the institutions in India. At the same time, the Indian institutions also can set up their campuses outside the Indian shores. And of course, there will be criteria defined. And again, there are some criteria already exist, but there has been emphasis that the education internationalization will be the call of the day as we move in the higher education space. Then what is again standing out is the standalone HI professional institutions evolve into multidisciplinary institutions. Now, if you really look at particularly the engineering education, you will see that over the years, the engineering education actually was driven into their silos. So earlier, the engineering education institutions were set up. which were disconnected from the main universities. Then their engineering universities were created, which were at the state level, where all engineering colleges came under those universities. So slowly, the multidisciplinary universities and engineering institution actually they got segregated slowly. So engineering student will not have exposure from the broader education thing, and vice versa. So that's what actually happened over the years. Now the policy is proposing that those standalone institutions, which were either engineering or management or the monolithic kind of institution, they have to be converted or have to evolve as the time goes into multidisciplinary institution. So you cannot have an institution which will be running only one program, but it should be having a more broad-based kind of program. And then there will be a special education zone for disadvantaged regions, so that those children who are deprived of quality education in higher education space, I think these special educational zones will cater to those needs, and the broader base will be created for the students who are disadvantaged, region-wise or even otherwise. And then they have insisted that there will be a National Education Technology Forum, because technology is going to play a very important role, right, in the higher education space. Next, please. The policy has also, in my opinion, has sort of overemphasized the use of technology in higher education. Of course, the use of technology has been there, it has been growing, and as we know, then in COVID-19, I think the entire education system has been running only because of ICT. So as and when the need rises, the technology starts playing a role. However, the NEP 2020 has made an extra mention about use of technology in higher education. So use of technology in what? Use of technology in education planning to assess the requirement, national requirement of what kind of graduates we require, which areas, which disciplines, which streams we require graduates, some kind of a planning assessment. The technology used for teaching, learning process and assessment, the technology used for administration, ERPs, and all that for the running educational institution, and also for regulation using self-disclosure, as I mentioned, right, for getting approvals and the accreditations and so on and so on. Increasing access of disadvantaged group, that many times the technology actually has put equality in the society, that many times those students who cannot really get access to the higher educational or premier institution. Just a simple example is NPTEL, that when the lectures from IITs were made available through the NPTEL, now every corner, every college student can actually access that material, right? And the technology has facilitated that the student can now learn a subject from the expert, not necessarily within the country, but across the world. So it actually increases the accessibility for the disadvantaged group. Divyang-friendly education software development, right? That we have to, this is a special need which is there, and technology can play a very important role for this. E-content in regional languages. Slowly it is happening, but they have emphasized it that the technology should play an important role in creating the content into the regional languages, so that people don't have to depend only on English. Probably they can develop their own subject depending upon in the regional languages. And of course, then for getting the practical experience, the virtual laboratories and the National Technology Education Forum, digitally equipped schools. So these are some of the suggestions which the NEP 2020 has specifically mentioned in higher education system. So they have put a special thrust in technology playing important role, right, in the higher education system of India. Next, please. So if you ask me what are the things which immediately strike you, right, which are very admirable in this new education policy, NEP 2020, first is the emphasis that the gross enrollment ratio has to be increased to 50%. I think that is something very, very good target and very, very desirable thing for the country, because at the moment India is probably lowest from the gross enrollment ratio point of view. Second one is the National Research Foundation, where the funding can be given to the institution for research. Third is educational leadership program. In fact, this and the teacher training program this was not very explicitly mentioned, but the NEP 2020 mentioned explicitly. And I think this is a very, very good move, because it really says that if you wanted to create the good education system in India, you have to mentor the educational leaders, you have to produce educational leaders. Just putting anybody and everybody in any place of top position in education system will not really create a top level education system in the country. So this educational leadership program, where leaders can be maintained and can be trained, I think this is a very, very good proposal which the NEP 2020 makes. At the same time, research is very, very mandatory and desirable for the higher education system, but so is teaching. And it is assumed many times that a good researcher automatically will do a good teaching. However, sometimes it may not be true. If the teacher training program can really impart the teaching skills, the large number of students will get benefited, and the entire education system will become very, very strong. The single regulatory body, again, is a very welcome move. The academic flexibility is again a very striking proposal which is made. Enhance liberal art component and the holistic development. This policy categorically emphasizes. And I think this is again very, very important, because from engineering or technology, it's not only the development of your engineering skills and the technology skills, but ultimately you have to have a holistic development. Everybody has to become a good human being. Everybody has to make a good citizen of this country. And then, of course, you should become a good professional. And in the engineering education, if you really see, in the years, this component has been gradually gone down and down and down and down. And the courses which used to be offered by humanities and social sciences, people started thinking it is a burden on engineering education. And the first thing, whenever the credits were reduced in any of the programs, the first casualty used to be always these courses, which were the humanities and social science courses. I think this policy says that no, these courses are at utmost importance, and liberal education should be integrated with the professional education and so on. And of course, it then talks about the online education, which gives you the path for the lifelong learning, which is the need of an hour for technology education, because technology changes very rapidly and you have to be always learning on your own through this lifelong learning process. So these are some of the admirable aspects of the education policy. Having now gone through the education policy, let us now ask a question that in future, when we go into 21st century, what kind of education we want to have? Policy has made certain proposals. But if I wanted to create an education system for 21st century, what kind of education system actually I'm going to create and we should create? So let us make certain observation before we say that that's the education system we want. So let us go to the next slide. So there are certain important observations one can make about future education in 21st century. First thing one can note is that the future world will be technology dominated. And this is becoming very, very clear that 2000 onwards, if you really look at the education system or even otherwise, our entire life is now getting more and more controlled by technology. So the world is going to be dominated by technology. Second thing which is important is that the technology is unpredictable and its lifespan will get shorter and shorter. So lifespan, whatever happened in last 100 years in technology, maybe almost same thing happened in last 10 years in technology. And maybe same thing will happen in next couple of years in the years to come. So the lifetime of a technology is shrinking. And many of the technologies, especially coming in ICT, information and communication technology, many of the technologies are highly unpredictable. And the world actually has to adapt to these changes which are going to come in technology, because they are unpredictable. Things are going to happen, right? Organically, many things have happened. For example, internet came. Nobody knew what internet would do, but it completely changed the way of living, way of thinking, way of interaction with each other, and it modified the world completely and permanently. Same thing might happen in future also with technology. So these changes are going to happen at an unprecedented rate and unpredictably, and the future graduates have to be prepared for it. The future world will be interconnected, right? Dominance of ICT, and as I said, internet has really changed our world. So interconnection in the world. So one thing what the interconnection has done is that the proximity concept is completely gone. So the whole world, anywhere in the corner, you can talk to him, you can discuss with him, you can interact with him as if you are discussing with your neighbor. So earlier, you used to have a certain physical accessibility, the neighborhood concept. That concept is completely gone. So that is the interconnectedness in the world. Future world will be global, which is the cyber world, and the local physical at the same time. So you see, today we actually live simultaneously in two worlds. One world, which is the cyber world, other world, which is the physical world. What is the difference between these two worlds? The physical world is reasonably predictable. You can extrapolate this physical world. So if somebody asks you, like physical world, the parameter which come, like what are the resources which you require? What is the food requirement? What is the energy requirement? What is the population? How the population is going to grow? What is the educational requirement? In this, you can predict for next 5 years, 10 years reasonably well, because you know the way things are going to happen. But somebody asks you to make a prediction for the internet technology, what is going to happen after 10 years? One can put ourselves 10 years back and ask, what is happening today because of this technology? Would we have predicted that 10 years back? And the answer will be emphatically no. So you see that this global, which is cyber world, which is very global, which is non-linear, which is completely unpredictable. That is one world we live, or the students, graduates are going to handle. Second world is the physical world, which is predictable, linear, and you have to prepare for that at the same time. And the future world will be stressed for natural resources. There are these UN studies which show that the energy requirement will go about 300%. The food requirement may go about 200%. Natural resources will be down by about 70-80%. So when we talk about engineering and technology, we have to prepare now people to handle this situation, right? Which will be a world which will be the naturally stressed, resources stressed world, and graduates have to really function in that world. Next, please. So the future engineering, when we look at, first of all, 10 years back, the National Academy of Engineering, US, they had defined about 10 grand challenges which the 21st century technologists and engineers have to face and they have to handle. Actually, a similar exercise was also done by TIFAC, India, that what would be the technology requirement in about 2035, not that long term, but all those things have to be brought into the focus of the engineering education. So at the moment, engineering education, when we are talking about, there are certain compartmentalization which is done, and these challenges which are going to be haunting the society in the years to come, they have not been completely integrated into the engineering curriculum. Technology is still seen more like a standalone kind of thing, and organically whatever requirement comes, the engineering education keep on supplying it. Secondly, which is engineers will require, is a multidisciplinary and a systemic thinking. Right? So because the problems are not going to be always compartmentalized. So saying that I'm an electrical engineer or mechanical engineer probably will not serve a purpose. You will look at a problem, and whatever is required to solve a problem, that knowledge and training has to be imparted to the engineers. Innovative and creative thinking. Information, knowledge is available now through the internet to everybody practically. What distinguishes one from other is how innovatively you can think, how many creative ideas you have, right, which can bring new technology and make the life more comfortable. More liberal art courses, building character, ethical values, which are not emphasized too much in technology institutions, I think has to be brought into engineering education. And a global mindset, which means that to become a successful technology or engineering person, you should be also having a good knowledge of society, the politics, the economics, and also the policies which are governed by technology and will be applied to the technology. So engineers have to be exposed to actually the knowledge to make really a person who can really play an active role into the societal development at the global level. And then digital literacy, lifelong learning, already emphasized. Sustainability, again, in technical education is not talked too much about. Right? We talk about environmental engineering course, but there is no sustainability per se which is emphasized, right, in our product development cycle. And as the world becomes more and more stressed for natural resources, the sustainability will have to be extra emphasized, right, for tomorrow the engineer. But more importantly, from engineering education from India point of view, the most crucial thing which is required is the quality culture. At the moment, we are having a very large base of engineering graduates. But invariably, the industry says these engineers are not employable. Even the global level, when you say competitiveness, you will see that only 20-30% students really come up to that global level. So what it means is that over the year, we have created a large base of engineering. Number is increased, but in the process, somewhere the quality has been compromised. And this quality culture has to be re-established. So as today, there is more supply of engineering institutions in the country compared to the demand, how the institutions are empty. Why they are empty? Because they are not really standing up to the quality. And since students have a choice, they always would like to go where the quality is given. So we require a large number of institutions, right, in the technology and engineering. But at the same time, this quality consciousness has to be an important aspect of education. It is not only a number. It is not the number of graduates which we produce, but what quality level we produce. That is going to decide really the future of engineering in the country. Next, please. So NEP 2020, then if I really look at this, what is the requirement of engineering in the years to come? I would say that the NEP 2020 facilitates many of these things. For example, the most societal problem lies on intersection of the sub-disciplines. I think NEP 2020 already has said that we should create a multidisciplinary culture in the university. And I think that is something which the engineering education also is looking for, which NEP 2020 facilitates. Second thing with NEP 2020, again, facilitate under this multidisciplinary is restructuring of departments and disciplines. Maybe as the time moves, these hard lines of different engineering disciplines might become faint. Maybe students can take admission into an engineering program and they can decide something from this discipline, something from that discipline. And that choice should completely remain with the student. That means that it should become a student-centric kind of education system, which NEP is facilitating. Flexibility into curriculum. And that's what, again, NEP is emphasizing. And today, students also want that many times they get into a particular discipline of engineering, and after some time they realize that no, that's not something they wanted to do. But our system at this point of time is so rigid that even if they wanted to change the branch, there is no possibility of changing the branch after some time. Maybe the NEP 2020 will facilitate of getting a flexibility that after some time, if you decide to really do part of that in other engineering discipline, students will be able to do that. Ease in credit transfer from the various sources. So again, you don't have to depend upon only one institution, the best resources available in the world. You can actually learn from that. You can get the skills developed from that, and they can be imparted into your education system, and student can decide from where to get from what. And that flexibility, again, is facilitated by the NEP 2020. Concept of major and minor, which has been used by many of the premier institutions. I remember in IIT, this concept exists. Even Bennett University, we did that. Many other institutions do that. This may become really the important aspect of the flexibility into the education. Somebody may get a degree in particular discipline, but somebody may get a minor into completely disjoint discipline. So it is not that you can get a minor in mechanical if you are doing a major in electrical. There could be a possibility that you may do a major in engineering, but you can do minor in a media, or you can do minor in law, or you can do any other completely disjoint area. And that kind of flexibility, again, this policy does facilitate. Exposure to societal problem, which the policy has emphasized, and modern engineers have to be really trained for that. design thinking and integration of knowledge, again, which is required for the modern engineering graduate. These attributes are again emphasized by the National Education Policy. I would say that the National Education Policy 2020 is facilitating many of the things which even otherwise the engineering education would have desired to have. And many, suppose these changes we wanted to put into engineering education system, the present system probably would not have allowed that. With NEP 2020 in place, those facilitation would be easier, and whatever we wanted to do for 21st century engineering program, I think we will be able to do in a little more ease compared to what otherwise would have been there. So I would say that the first implication of NEP 2020 will be a facilitation of what is the desired engineering education in the country in the years to come. So that's what the NEP 2020 is going to do to the engineering education. However, having said that, when we come to the policy which is in place, and we also know what we want in the education system, when we go to implementation, there are certain issues which have to be really deliberated, discussed, threadbare. So let us take those issues one by one and see how easy or how difficult those issues are, right? When we want to implement this the policy for higher education. Next, please. So there are certain implementation issues for NEP 2020. The first issue which is there for NEP 2020 is this multiple entry, multiple exit points. Now, from the societal angle, as I mentioned, this is a very, very desirable feature because there are a large number of students who want to have this flexibility because of their the economic condition or because of their social conditions and many other things. However, if I allow this multiple entry, multiple exit points, it has implication for three things. One is it has first the strongest implication for the academic of the program. What the multiple entry, multiple exit program says is that somebody decides to leave the program after first year. He should be able to get something called what is called a certificate. That certificate should make him employable at certain level. If he leaves the program after 2 years, he should get something called what is called a diploma, which again should make him employable at certain higher level in the industry. And finally, if he can get the entire program completion, he should be able to get a degree, which makes him employable at certain level. Now, at the moment, if you look at the engineering program is never thought this way. The engineering program has always been seen in a comprehensive fashion. Nobody assumed that somebody will leave after first year and look for a job. So what we do in engineering program, we first teach all the basic science courses in first year. Then we teach the foundation courses. And then we teach the advanced courses into engineering, and then we go for projects and so on. Now, with this structure, imagine if somebody wants to leave after first year, what kind of job he can get? Industry, he will not find any use of simple basic science courses which he has done in the first year. What that means is, somewhere these vocational kind of courses have to be integrated into this program in the first year, and their emphasis should be slowly tapered down as you go to the higher years into engineering. So somebody leaves after first year, maybe he should get something which is like a ITI kind of hands-on experience. You can do some basic courses, but he should get some skills which will make him employable. But in other words, your academic parameter may have to be inverted in some sense. First, little more hands-on, then little more experimental, then little more theoretical, right? So this inversion of thing which requires a deeper thinking if you want to make multiple entry, multiple exit point really useful. This multiple entry, multiple exit point followed in engineering program, that's a big question. But if the policy says it should be open to everybody, maybe engineering programs also have to do this and accommodate this requirement of the student from society. Third impact of this policy, the multiple exit, multiple entry option is there is the administrative aspect. The institutional planning will be in trouble because the institution would not know how many students are going to be after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. And that will have an impact on the recruitment of faculty. It will have impact on financial operation of the institution. So this aspect of multiple entry, multiple exit, which is very desirable from the social angle, it requires a deeper thinking of how is it not going to disrupt the present academic thread or fabric of the institution, and to what extent this should be permitted and what extent should not be permitted. It cannot really be a blanket thing given to everybody that anybody can walk in and out, right? So that he can really get into the program and out of that as per his will. So it requires a deeper thinking. Second implementation issue is the credit transfer and credit bank. It has been proposed that you can do credit from one institution and transfer to the other institutions and so on and so on. It looks on paper very good, the flexibility from student point of view. But the question is, first of all, do we have a uniform credit bank framework in the country? Every university has its own style of defining credits. Some define even still the percentages, some define grades. So we do not have at this point of time a uniform credit structure defined. So first thing we have to do is we have to create a national credit framework before this flexibility can be granted to the student. Secondly, if somebody accumulates certain number of credits, ultimately who will grant him degrees? So suppose 50% at the moment, there are a large number of institutions, their finances depend upon the students and the credits which the student do in their institution. If half the credits are done from other institutions, then after half the period, the student comes and says, I want to join your institution and give me a degree, that institution has lost half the revenue. Now, in that case, why the institution would be interested in granting a degree to him on financial level? Secondly, would that institution be accepting the academic standard which the credits are bringing from other institutions? So do we have a uniform academic standard across the institution? Which institutions can really exchange grades? Can it be a free market? These require much more deeper thinking and a national level policy development of implementation of this credit bank, which is going to really a game changer, right, into the higher education system. There may be a possibility that students may accumulate credits from various places, and there may be certain government universities which will honor these credits and will give you a degree. But then slowly their credibility will come in question, right? Because the uniformity may not be there and so on and so on. So this requires much more deeper thinking. The student-centric flexible curriculum. If you give a flexibility to the student to decide his own curriculum, it requires a lot more resources and it also requires a lot more faculty right into the institution. Today we are having an acute shortage of faculty in institutions. And when you are talking about engineering institutions, we are not talking only about the premier institutions like IITs and NITs. We are talking about the private institutions, which are very large in number. Almost 60 to 70% of technical education is actually in private sector. The quality faculty and the number of faculty which are there per student, that number is still not up to the mark. If this flexibility is given for defining their own curricula, it will require a lot more faculty available time, right? And that flexibility essentially is going to tax those institutions, right? You require a lot less faculty student ratio. Today we are having a faculty student ratio of something like 1:20. ICT is thinking of changing to 1:25. Many private institutions want that to become 1:30, 1:35. If with those kind of things for financial reason, if are accommodated, then this implementation, you will be really in big trouble, because you will not be able to create the flexibility, though it may remain on paper. And teaching on local languages. Question one can ask is, yes, at the entry point, you are very good in your local language, so you should be taught in local language. But as you become higher and higher in education, should you remain confined to your local language? If that happens, you will remain confined to your own state. You will not be able to go outside your state. Is it a desirable thing which is required? So can we think of something which will use this local language thing, which the at the entry point the student may require, but slowly strengthen them so that they can become more competent at the global level, at the national level. So it requires a deeper thinking, right, from the implementation point of view. Next, please. The next issue which is there is the critical and innovative thinking, right? This has been said in many fora by many people that our syllabus should be innovative, right? Our thinking, students should be having innovative ideas, thinking, and so on. But all for doing all this, you require a much less loaded curriculum. You require more flexibility given to the student. At the moment, engineering curriculum is so packed that there is no free time available for students to really do out-of-the-box thinking. So it requires a completely restructuring, right? If you wanted to get innovative solutions, right, in the syllabi. Vocational training and integration in main curricula. I already mentioned that if you want to integrate this vocational training, it is easier said than done, because at this point of time, none of the educational institutions actually have vocational training as an integral part of education. How do we do it? If we really create vocational training centers within the universities, then they are going to cost you more. Can there be, and again, they will not be able to offer a variety of vocational programs. Can there be a possibility that a cluster of universities or institutions come together, pool resources, and create these vocational training institutions, which can be shared by various universities in that region? Students from various universities can come and do the vocational courses in those centers and do the normal degree courses in their respective institutions. Or can the university, the industries play a role in imparting the vocational training to the students which are in the university system? These require a good interaction with the university and discussion. How this vocational training will be imparted and will become integral part of the education system, where at this point of time, the vocational training practically is non-existent. It requires a completely new infrastructure to be created in the system. Practical and hands-on experience, experiential learning. Again, these words are always said. Policy has also emphasized them. Question is, because of resources and because of the funding available for setting up laboratories, invariably these institutions run away from setting up laboratories because they are cost intensive. So over the years, if you see, most of the engineering programs have become theoretical. Now we are talking about virtual laboratory. If you wanted to create a hands-on experience, we require a very intensive hardware laboratories to be in place. And this is going to be cost intensive. That is going to increase the cost of the education. So again, the societal angle will come, the affordability of education will come into picture. So industrial support might be required to create environment which is more hands-on, right? Students can get exposure to the practical problems and they can have more experiential learning. Next, please. Okay. The next issue which is there in implementation is the quality faculty selection. We talked about the faculty leadership development, the faculty training program, and so on and so on. But the first question one can ask is, what is the selection criteria of the faculty? Should we select the faculty with any relaxation? So I can find for education, which is such a core thing in India, I think we should compare education only with our armed forces, which is the national security. So when we talk about national security, we always select people which are based only on their performance, which are based only on their the quality which they have or the criteria which they should meet. No other criteria is there for selection into armed forces. When we come to education, should we not do the same thing? Should we say that no, the quality faculty or the education, if you want to create, the faculty is the backbone, and the reason is very simple. The faculty has a multiplicative effect. One faculty affects 100, 200 students, who are sitting in front of him. So when we talk about the faculty selection, I think it is important that the implementation of the faculty selection has to be purely based on merit and nothing else. Right? If you really want to create a robust and the forward-looking education system. Second thing which is required in the education system is the autonomy. It has been, on paper, the autonomy has been always there. You have administrative autonomy, you have academic autonomy, you have financial autonomy. But when I go for implementation, you say there is no autonomy there. The syllabus are controlled by some bodies. The fees is controlled by some other body. Right? The number of classes, the projects, many things are controlled by various bodies which are there. Can we say that the quality, the autonomy is given to the institution, make them accountable, right? And let them stand on their own feet and let them perform, right? And whatever the finances are required for that, they should be allowed to really transparently create those resources and run the institutions which will be at the global standard. The one thing which is completely missing in this policy, which really bothered me, is there is no good financial model which the education policy is given. The education policy has categorically said that the higher education has to be philanthropy. Now, problem is, when we talk about philanthropy or when we talk about even non-profit education, the question is how do we decide the sustainability of this institution? So you say it should not make a profit of the institution. I fully agree with that. It should not make a profit. But if the institutions make loss, then who is going to bear that loss because of various reasons? It could be because of geographical reason. It could be other regional problems which are there. And there is a committee from Dr. G.D. Yadav which says about 40% vacancies in engineering institutions in Maharashtra. And the reason for that is because these are financially unviable institutions. Now, there is a regenerative mechanism in this. Somewhere the institution, the quality falls. Because of that, the intake of the student drops. The intake of the student drops, so the financial revenue drops. If the revenue drops, the number of faculty hired are dropped, or the quality of faculty is dropped. If that is dropped, the quality of education goes down. That further brings down the number of students in the institution. So this regenerative mechanism essentially make the institution collapse. There is no stability at this point of time because of this financial thing which is there. So should we not talk about a robust financial model for higher education system? Apparently, even in engineering education system, it is assumed engineering education should be affordable to everybody. And in that process, even the national the fee committee, which is decided, the state governments invariably turn down those numbers, and almost at 30% fees they decide for the engineering institutions. With that number, the institutions become completely unviable. Unviable in what sense? They cannot have facilities, they cannot have laboratories. But the bigger jolt they have is they cannot have the quality factor. So if you go even by the 6th pay commission salaries or 7th pay commission salaries, and you go by the student faculty ratio, which is defined by this policy, you will see that there is a minimum cost incurred for an education. If that minimum cost is not borne by somebody, then the quality of education is certainly going to degrade. And saying that this cost will come from the student, sometimes it may not be feasible. There may be economic reason for that. But then should be some other financial avenues to subsidize this. Can we have the education loans to these people without any collateral? Can the government subsidize the education? These are some of the issues which are very core to the quality of education, especially engineering, if you talk about, which is very resource intensive. These issues have to be handled, threadbare. So can tax benefits be given to industries? Can the CSR be more and more used for the higher education in the country, so that these institutions can set up facilities and the quality faculty can be hired? So this aspect, so as such, the education policy doesn't talk too much about technical education. It talks more about the overall holistic education. But whatever technical education it has talked about, Within that also, the financial model has not been discussed by the policy in great detail. And I think if we wanted to make this policy very, very successful, right, and whatever has been proposed, and especially in engineering, I think we really require a very, very robust financial model created. And that will be one of the biggest challenges for the people to really come up so that this institution becomes sustainable. Finally, the challenge is industry-academia partnership. I think we have been talking about this for the last 20 years, but still that partnership has not come to a level where we really want it. We have to work on this. We have to create more flexibility and faculty exchange, the professionals coming from the industry to academia, and so on and so on. So these are some of the issues, which are there, which though on paper the policy is facilitating, but when you really go on ground reality, you will require a lot more work to be done before this policy can be implemented. So I will leave it at this point, and thank you very much for the opportunity. And if you have any questions, we can have more discussion on this. And any other suggestions are most welcome. Something which I perceive, so I just put it here, but other people are equally knowledgeable, so they can also contribute, in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shevvalkar. It was quite a comprehensive presentation. What you are saying is that the policy is well-intentioned, but as always, there is the devil in the detail. I see a bunch of questions here, but unfortunately, I think we can't take more than about 15 minutes of questions. So let me go through them for you. The first question is by Prashant Date from IIT Bombay. In the current system, there is a step change from the 12th standard to the first year in engineering. Does the new education policy address that? The mismatch, if bridged, can make the transition from higher secondary to engineering smooth?
Not talk very explicitly, but what they have said is this is the 10+2, whatever the structure which they talked about, and 3 years. It might, depending on the curriculum which you have in that the school, high school level, it might smoothen it out. But there is no categorical mention of that. So that is one of the implementation issues which will be there.
Right.
One can discuss that.
Yeah. Also, it's probably a little too much to expect because at 12th standard you are not training students only for engineering. You are training students for the whole gamut of courses. Yeah. Dr. Sanat Kumar asks. Here a two-part question. Will the degrees awarded be based on performance in examinations? May I suggest that there should be only one national level examination for all states in India, irrespective of which institution a student passed out from? That's the first part. Yeah, if you can take that, then I will.
So I think this is not a very good proposition because education should really be very diverse, and each university should have its own culture and own flavor. So robustness and evaluation should become more and more robust. I mean, there is no question about that. But should there be uniformity about the syllabus and the examination across the country? I think that may not be a good idea because there has to be diversity, right, in the university system. And each university should have defined their own objectives and the philosophy. I think that is very desirable.
I think the second part you've already answered partly. This is about the desirability of having a national level syllabus, irrespective of the state, which establishes the minimum level of expertise an aspirant for a UG degree should aspire for. Then global recognition for Indian students will be realized. So this is the...
No, it will be very difficult actually in new education policy, the way the flexibility is given. Yeah. You can define only maybe a broad structure for your degree. The micro level will not be there at all. Right. So student will be deciding what kind of sets of courses which are there. So it is actually contrary to that. Instead of having uniformity of the syllabi and something, it is going to be exactly opposite. It is going to be much more flexible.
Prashant Date has more questions, but I'll come back to him a little later. Let me take questions from somebody else. Ravi Kumar is asking, how does NEP 2020 address the problem of increasing the enrollment to 50, the GR to 50%? This is not clear.
Yeah, so they are looking for more private partners actually in setting up institutions, and increase in enrollment actually through this private partnership. But again, the question will again boil down to the financial model of education. Because private institution, if they get into it, at least they would like to become financially sustainable. Philanthropy will not work completely there.
Yeah.
So by increasing GER, you have to increase more number of institutions. So at the moment, we are having about 1,000 universities in the country. Maybe we would require a number of more 2-3 times of this size. But then they have to become sustainable.
Right.
And that is the only way probably which we can have more GER.
Right. Okay. The next question from Prashant Date again is, how do engineers taught in different regional languages communicate when employed in a company where employees come from all over the country?
Yeah, so that's the big question actually, So that's what I mentioned. That this proposal which is made that the higher education should be in vernacular languages. It should be maybe at the beginning of the program, you can start with that, with a common language like English or whatever is there, which make them more global and national, and slowly sort of strengthen them in that part. Let not entire program be taught into vernacular language. That will confine them to only their own states. And that is not a very desirable thing.
Right.
So slowly we have to make them stronger so that they become more global engineers rather than their own state engineers.
Right.
So I think that is something which is we have to really take very, very seriously. That
Right.
How do we really do that? Take a balance between vernacular languages and making a global engineer.
Right. The Sanat Kumar has the same kind of question, so I think you've already answered that. So let me go to the next question, which is also from Prashant Date. Is the stress on natural resources an outcome of excessive reliance on technology?
See, at the moment, if you really look at last 100 years, the way things have evolved, nobody really thought about natural resources, that we have limited natural resources. So you look at the coal energy, you look at the petroleum, right? You look at other fossil fuels which are there. Now people are realizing that no, they have limited resources. We cannot really keep on consuming them indefinitely. So renewableness of energy now has become an integral part and sort of has come in forefront. Same is going to happen for the food and other things. So it is not only the technology. Technology will do its part. But in addition to technology, the overall societal thinking has to change. Unless that thinking is changed, unless everybody becomes really conscious about the sustainability, only technology will not be able to help. And that's what probably is the integration of liberal arts, which makes you aware of your societal needs. I think that is going to play a very, very important role. So at this point of time, what is happening is everybody who thinks he has money, he can use the resources unlimitedly without worrying about whether somebody else will be deprived because of this. There was a US study which says that at this current rate of consumption, if you go by, we will require 4 times the earth resources to make this life sustainable. But we have only one earth. So we have to cut down our consumptions. So technology will do its job, but actually holistic development and sustainability thinking has to be integrated into the education system. Without that, there is no choice.
Okay, Dr. Ravi Kumar is asking, how does NEP 2020, does it have any suggestions on how to measure innovativeness, creativity, etc.?
Incidentally, no.
Yeah.
They have emphasized it. Actually, this question has been always there for engineering, that for research we can evaluate it very easily, right? But for innovation, how do we evaluate it? I don't think we have a very, very robust answer for that. In fact, many times people even hesitate to do this innovation and entrepreneurship for the simple reason because many times they fail, and there is no good counting mechanism which says that, well, you tried, but it was a great idea, but didn't work. Yeah. So academics also invariably get into the research because you can easily show that I have done so much of work or publication. So at the moment, I don't think they will propose anything on innovation measurement.
And another question from the same member of the audience. Do you think any Indian university is already conforming to NEP 2020 standards? For example, IITs.
Actually, in IITs, many of the things are already done. For example, IITs already have gone multidisciplinary over the years.
Yeah.
The concept of minor, the flexibility program, the 5-year integrated program, many of the things are already there in IIT. So many of the things which NEP is proposing, I think IIT over the years slowly have done that. Right?
Okay.
Only other institutions which were siloed, they have to become more broad-based.
Right.
IITs also have to change. There is no doubt about it, right? But there is a more requirement of other institutions to really become similar to that, right? So that there is a broad base created and not only handful of institutions in the country.
Okay. So Dr. R.K. Singh is asking how the ethical practices may be implemented. The student membership in professional societies, could this be possibly one way? And how they would be mentored?
See, basically the ethical values inculcation is not a overnight process. It is a slow process.
It's a
right? So first of all, I feel one thing we should do for the students is we should create the heroes which are not only successful professional, successful financially, but the heroes which are even ethically high valued heroes. At this point of time, I don't think we are creating heroes, right, which are other than the finance or the money which they made. So only the heroes, the heroes are only billionaires. Can we project them the right culture and the right value system, right from the first year, right from the school days, that what should be valued in life and what should not be valued in life? That cannot be done through one course or two courses. It should be done repeatedly through various activities, various courses, right, various interactions, and repeatedly should be emphasized that becoming a good human being is the priority, not becoming a good professional. That is next priority. First priority, you should become a good human being, good citizen, and then a good engineer. I think that is the process which has to be done in a systematic way at every level in society. Then only it will happen. It is not only education which will do it.
Thank you. I think that is a lot of questions, but since there is a couple of minutes, let me ask you a question. Is there an expectation, in this Meru concept, is there an expectation that the IITs will also start, departments in law and medicine and architecture? And I mean, architecture is already there in some places, but
well, it is not said very clearly.
Yeah.
But this whatever Meru concept is there, it is creating more accessibility to the regional people. So of course now IITs are there practically in every state. There is a IIT, but IIT still is not that accessible to the underprivileged area.
Right.
So you will require institutions which are again good quality, multi-level, multidisciplinary institutions. May not be like IIT, but which will have a more accessibility to the underprivileged people, right, at the level also. So IITs can do an important role. They can do mentorship of these institutions.
Okay.
Because they already know, how to really build the quality institution. So when they want to set up these institutions, maybe each state IIT can play a role in mentorship, right? So that the ethical values and the culture of that IIT can be imparted and slowly taken to these institutions also. Right. So that may be a path by which IITs can contribute.
Okay.
There is a question from my side, Roy, here.
Yeah.
At what level the students or the teachers will get exposed to this national or society problems, which is one of the important part in your new education system? So is there any guideline to that?
No, again, it will be implementation problem. So one of the ways, for example, I tried to do when I was in IIT Delhi, that we have this first year, we have this NSS program, where all the students have to register either NCC or NSS. What you can ask the students to really go to the nearby villages at panchayat level or district level and really identify the problems which are there in society. They don't have to solve the problem. let them really see the society. Let them not sit into the classroom and see only technology. And after first year, if they identify a problem, when they sit into the classes, let them keep relating the problem to the engineering content which they are going through in their curriculum. Let them in the back of their mind, they keep on working on it. Can I solve that problem by using this? And if more and more people are exposed at a younger level, you will see that they become more and more aware of the society. So they have to be really sent to the societal level, ask them to observe what is happening in society, right? And what are the problems which the society is facing. Something may have technology solution, something may not have technology solution, but at least they will be exposed to the problem. And that can be done right at from the younger level, rather than professional level. Yeah.
Okay, there are no further questions. Thank you, Professor Shivagaonkar, for the talk and for patiently answering all the questions. I will now request Professor Kulkarni to propose a vote of thanks and conclude the webinar.
Thank you.
It's my pleasant duty to present vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Shivagaonkar on behalf of INE headquarters as well as INE Mumbai chapter, as well as on behalf of all attendees, for giving an excellent overview of the whole perspective of the new education policy. He basically covered, gave a very brief overview of previous education policies, the major problems of the education systems. Then he also highlighted many implementation issues like related to multiple entry and exit option, credit transfer, flexible curriculum, teaching in local languages, how to inculcate innovative thinking, and so on and so forth. Then he went on to say that some of these issues require greater autonomy, sound financial model, and greater participation of industry in the in sustaining the new model. And finally, all of us agree that as he also said, the intention is excellent, but all of us have to do groundwork for its successful implementation. So I'm sure such talks will definitely make us think more and more as to how we can make this policy implementable, and basically help government to implement whatever the government is thinking on. So thank you very much, Professor Shivagaonkar. I have been at a personal level, I have been very fortunate to have worked closely with Professor Shivagaonkar, and technically I have learned many things from him, and also through some his administrative experience also is very vast. I hope to learn something from him on that account also. So thank you, Professor Shivagaonkar, for an excellent talk. So because I would like to also thank Professor Suresh, who is convener of INE Mumbai chapter, who have very efficiently moderated the whole webinar and handled the question answer very effectively, and allowed Professor Shivagaonkar to answer QAs of the attendees in an efficient way. Finally, I would like to thank INE headquarters for arranging the web services and the web-related help to organize this webinar, and also for publicizing this event. Finally, I thank all the attendees without whom this webinar would not be successful. So thank you all, and please await for the next announcement for March seminar. So we'll announce in due course of time. Thank you. So with these comments, we would like to close this webinar. Meet you again next month. Thank you.